Hello and welcome to another video from Mr. Miz Nation, and today we are talking the 2014 season opener for F1, which was obviously the Australian Grand Prix that happened just this morning. So if you haven't seen the race, or you don't know the results, or you're watching the BBC highlights, then I would tune out now, because I'm going to be going quite in depth about what happened this morning and everything that went on and the new Formula 1 basically. But this video is kind of going to be kind of on the swing, because there is still a lot going on in the stewards. There's this whole Daniel Ricciardo thing, was he exceeded maximum fuel limit, so it's a question of is he going to get disqualified or not, because Red Bull are appealing it, but I'll get into that a bit later when I get onto Daniel Ricciardo. But I'm just basically going to go driver up here from 22nd to 1st, and just kind of talk about the race in between it for each driver basically. But we'll start with turn 1, which was pretty chaotic. Obviously we didn't get going straight away. There was the parade lap, and then Max Chilton's car stalled on the grid, so they had to go round again. Max Chilton recovered to the pit lane along with the other Marussia, which then stopped on that at the start of that lap. So there was basically 2 Marussias that had to start in the pits, I believe, and then there was obviously the Lotus of Raymond Grosjean that was in the pits as well. But turn 1, pretty interesting. Nico Rosberg got an absolutely brilliant start. Magnussen almost spun into the wall just before turn 1. That was very, very close. He held that well, actually. But the main talking point of turn 1 was Kamui Kobayashi absolutely decapitating Felipe Massa. He got the car right underneath Felipe Massa's car, and it was interesting to see what it was like when 2 cars actually came together, because we haven't really seen that so far this year. So it's very interesting to see that Kamui Kobayashi kind of went underneath Massa slightly with that front wing. So that's kind of a sign for the future of what's going to happen when cars collide. But it seemed like Kobayashi just messed up his braking, but apparently now it's come out that there was a bit of a failure with the car, and that his brakes weren't quite working too well. And I mean, Kobayashi's been out of the sport for a couple of years as well, and I mean, with the double flipping parade laps, the tyres wouldn't have been brilliantly up to heat either, so it wasn't an ideal situation for Kobayashi, who was kind of out of position anyway after his pretty good qualifying. But disappointing for Massa, considering the pace of that Williams that was shown by Bottas in the race. But I'll get onto him a bit later. But disappointing for both drivers, since there is a lot of people that do like those 2 drivers and wanted to see them do well and progress through the race and go even higher, and maybe see Kobayashi get a point and see Massa maybe even get a podium. But moving on to the next big DNF, which was a big DNF, as it was a pole sitter, Lewis Hamilton, who basically lost cylinders and had a major engine problem, so he just couldn't really get any power down compared to the rest of the cars. He had the problem before the race on the parade lap. The team just didn't want to let him know. But they did say to bring the car in. Hamilton kind of ignored them, but then came in a couple of laps later. I was hoping that we would see a bit of a punch up between Hamilton and the Mercedes team, just kind of like going back and forth on the radio arguing. That would have been amazing, but that didn't really happen. Hamilton seemed a bit pissed off in the interview, but he just kind of accepted the fact that he couldn't really do much about it, and the team just has to move on. And they definitely have the pace, obviously, as I'll get onto later. But Hamilton, bitterly disappointing for him, but I did actually see it coming, to be honest. I thought he would kind of kill the car in the race and it would eventually just die, but I think it was more of the car problem than Hamilton actually driving it badly. So disappointing for him. Sebastian Vettel had kind of a similar problem. He just had a complete problem with the engine. I believe it was the or Kurjun or whatever it is that kind of failed on him a bit, and he got like passed by Max Chilton, and he was just getting passed by everyone. They just had to bring him into the pits, and it was a relatively simple retirement for Vettel. No kind of dramatics, apart from him obviously being quite annoyed. And you can kind of see that his side of been trying to be cool, calm and collected is kind of going a bit this season potentially, because he's going to be under a lot of pressure to deliver, and he didn't really seem too happy about the result really, and he was getting a bit edgy on the team radio as well, kind of similar to qualifying as well. But a bit disappointing for Vettel as well, especially since his teammate got second, at least provisionally. But moving on to Marcus Ericsson, who also DNF'd. He had to stop the car. So Caterham not having a brilliant day after having a pretty good qualifying. So it does kind of back up my point about Caterham having a struggling year and not really doing too well. But I feel sorry for Ericsson because he was just trying to get used to the track, and then that comes across. But at least he got a few laps under his belt. I believe it was like halfway through the race that he retired. So unlucky for him as well. But what can you do? That Caterham just wasn't quite reliable enough. And speaking of not being reliable enough, Lotus, both of them DNF'd in the end. I'm surprised they got as far as they did. They went further than quite a few of the other cars, so it was kind of a miracle to see Grosjean almost complete the race. I believe he's only like 10 or so laps shy of actually completing it. So Lotus were probably expecting to be out of the race by the first 10 laps, but they were keeping in there. They were never really kind of threatening the points positions, to be honest, but I mean they were still looking pretty solid, and they were kind of with Sauber, I guess. They weren't too dramatically off the pace compared to what they were with qualifying anyway, but it was kind of predictable that they were going to DNF really and stop, but they can develop in a car that can surely get to the end of races sooner rather than later. And it was also quite funny to see that Maldonado and Grosjean both stopped at the same place, which was quite funny, but very annoying for them. Moving on to 15th, Jules Bianchi. I believe he actually finished the race. It's just I don't think it was classified because it's so far down, because obviously he had his problem on the grid, so he had to start well down, and he got lapped so many times, and he actually got beat by Max Chilton, who was in 14th, who was classified as a finisher. Max Chilton, very good result for him in 14th. Don't know if that's his best career finish, actually. It might be. But he definitely did a very good job in there. Surprised me, but he still managed to finish the race. Just seems to go on this streak now of getting finishes every race. But Chilton very, very close to getting my first prediction right about Marussia. But obviously that didn't end up happening in the end. 13th was Esteban Gutierrez, who was pretty mediocre. I mean, he was pretty much nowhere to be seen in this race. He wasn't really challenging. Pretty much the story of Sauber's race, to be honest. He wasn't really in there at all. He was getting relatively past easy, and it was just a case of him finishing really. But he never really looked like he was going to trouble the points, so it was just a question of could he finish or not, and he did manage to get to the end, which was positive for Sauber, because at least they've got the reliability to work on, which a couple of other teams haven't at the moment. And then 12th was obviously Sutil, just in front of him. I believe Sutil tried to go for a one-stop. I'm not quite sure if it worked for him or not. Well, it obviously didn't, because he still finished way down in 12th, but I don't know if he actually ended up doing a one or two stop in the end, but I'm pretty sure he was set on doing a one stop at the first time I saw him. So Sutil wasn't quite able to pull the drive that he pulled out last season, and Sauber definitely need to try and find a bit more pace, because they seem to be behind Toro Rosso at the moment in terms of pace as well, and Force India, so they seem to be the lowest of the midfield teams, if you count out Lotus, of course, out of the equation. So Sauber will be happy to finish, but kind of a bit disappointed that they couldn't really trouble the points at all, and they were quite far off where they want to be probably. 11th was Perez, once again uneventful compared to his teammate anyway. Didn't quite get into the points, so I guess you could say a bit disappointing for Perez really. He would have hoped for points, to be honest, especially he would have especially wanted to have got ahead of those Toro Rossos, but I mean we really didn't see much from Perez in the race at all, at least I didn't. I mean he wasn't really in any battles, he was just kind of driving his own race in 11s. There's kind of a massive gap from 10s back to 11s. You kind of had the Force India and the Sauber cars that were just kind of back there, kind of non-existent, but just trying to hope they could get to the end. I think it was a nursing job for all the cars out of the top 10 were kind of nursing their cars, and I found that in the top 10 they were just absolutely going for it. But going on to Kvyat now in 10th, he had a relatively solid drive as well. I mean, it's not really too much of a surprise that he lost 2 places from his qualifying position. He did have 3 world champions behind him, although one of them did DNF, of course, in Vettel. But it was still an impressive drive by the youngster. He was still going pretty quickly, to be honest, and he was not too far off his teammate either. He mixed it up with the big boys such as Raikkonen and I believe Alonso at one point. I'm not quite sure about that though, but he did get passed by Bottas relatively easy, but it was a very solid finish for Kvyat in his first F1 race, to be honest. You couldn't have really asked for much more. Jean-Eric Vergne in 9th, just ahead of his teammate. Jean-Eric Vergne maybe could have done a bit better. I mean, 2 driver mistakes probably cost him against Raikkonen, and I guess you could say Bottas at that point when he dipped a tyre into the grass, which let Bottas through. He might have been able to have held him up a bit easier, but just wasn't ready to be for Jean-Eric Vergne. But still solid points for him. I guess it was pretty much the story of Toro Rosso. They were going to go backwards one way or another, really, in my opinion, after qualifying. But it was still a very good performance by Toro Rosso. They definitely surprised me this week, and probably the biggest surprise team, maybe just ahead of McLaren in terms of that for me. I don't think many people expected them to get points or even finish the race, to be frankly honest, especially since there was Renault. So very impressive by Toro Rosso. He may actually finish ahead of both the Red Bulls if Daniel Ricciardo gets disqualified, which would be slightly ironic. Moving on to 8th place, Kimi Raikkonen. Very disappointing from him. He just seemed to struggle, just like he'd been struggling through pretty much the whole weekend, to be honest. He just didn't really have anything. I mean, Bottas got past him relatively easy when he went off the track, and he was just struggling with the brakes, struggling with the car. And I think kind of Alonso was at points as well. I mean, it was relatively uneventful for Raikkonen, really, apart from passing Jean-Eric Vergne at the end and Kvyat at a few points. But he did lose out pretty badly in the safety car period, though, because he had to stack behind Alonso. So obviously Ferrari showing that they may favour Alonso already, because Raikkonen did have to stack behind Alonso, which I believe lost him 2 places as well at that point in the race anyway, and also aided Button quite nicely as well. But Raikkonen, he'll be looking to build on an 8th place, because that was pretty poor from him in my opinion. He can definitely do better than that, and once he gets used to the cars, I think he can push on a bit better and fight for podiums, as can Ferrari, who were also a bit disappointing in this race for me as well. Moving on to 7th, Nico Hülkenberg. Very solid drive as per usual, really. I mean, his tyres went off a bit, so he couldn't quite hold that 4th place that he held for quite a lot of the race. I mean, he was holding up a bit of a train before, couldn't quite hold off Bottas at the end either, but considering the car he was in and considering his teammates' performance, he did very well to get ahead of Raikkonen especially. But I think he'll be happy with 7th, to be honest, because that is a very solid position. And kind of I think it was Crofty on Sky Sports F1 pointed out a very good point that or it might have been Ted Kravitz actually, I can't quite remember who it was, but they pointed out that Hülkenberg picked the best option out of the options that he had, because really the only options that he had were Lotus, Force India and staying at Sauber, I would say. Staying at Sauber, he would have been probably slower if he stayed at Sauber, only by a bit potentially, but and then Lotus obviously, well, of course you wouldn't have gone to Lotus if you would have seen the state that they're in at the moment. And I guess Ferrari, that you could say that he could have maybe got the Ferrari drive, but I think that was very, very unlikely, to be honest. And I mean, he beat one of the Ferraris, so kind of ironic that he beat one of the drivers the driver that maybe stole his Ferrari seat in Kimi Raikkonen. Moving on to Bottas, who was in 6th. Very up and down race for him, but he definitely showed the pace of that Williams with the drive for sure. I mean, he got up to 6th, was challenging for 4th just behind Alonso and Hülkenberg in that train, and then obviously clipped the wall, got that puncher. Bitterly disappointing for him, but it was a very stupid mistake by him, and he's even said it in his interview for Sky Sports F1 that it was a stupid mistake, but I'm sure he'll learn from it. And he definitely showed very, very good pace. So I mean, it was great. He kind of aided himself really, because when he hit the wall, obviously he brought out a safety car because of debris that was on the track. So that kind of got him back into the hunt really. and he managed to drag his way back up to 6th place with some very impressive overtakes. I liked his move on Raikkonen around the outside, but that was obviously before he had his incident with the wall. But I think he was pretty unlucky with that incident with the wall as well, because if that was like a Bridgestone tyre or maybe even a Michelin tyre, it might have kind of held on, but the Prix are so sensitive really that it was game over really once he hit that wall slightly. But he definitely showed the pace of that Williams, which is sure to be a car that's going to be reckoned with in the next couple of races. And he definitely could have had a podium if he didn't have that hit into the wall at least, or at least 4th. And especially with Ricciardo's problems now, he could have been on the podium. Anyway, moving on to 5th, Fernando Alonso. He's always in the top 5 it seems. He just couldn't really seem to drag that car up to a podium. I thought he might have been able to over the weekend, but I kind of thought Ferrari was sandbagging when they went quickest in FP1, but they just didn't really have the pace this whole weekend really. Alonso summed it up pretty perfectly in qualifying yesterday when he pretty much said that this reflects where we are at the moment, that we're pretty much kind of in this 5th position, and I would say they're probably the 5th best team, to be frankly honest. I mean, I would put obviously Mercedes in front of them, I'd put McLaren in front of them, and I'd put Williams in front of them, and I'd potentially put Red Bull in front of them if Red Bull actually knew how to put the right amount of fuel in the car. But yeah, Alonso definitely won't be too happy that this Ferrari is once again not one of the best cars really, and he's going to have to completely drag it up there in the race and struggle in qualifying again. So it's going to be a similar story for Alonso, I have a feeling, this season, but he still will be up there fighting for the championship though, and Ferrari will develop over the season as well. But I'm pretty sure he will get a win or two at least this season. 4th we have Jenson Button. Very, very good drive. His inspired call to pit just before just as the safety car came out, he just saw the safety car boards and he dived into the pits at the last minute. Very, very good call by him.
2 places there.
And then that McLaren was just quick enough to get ahead of Alonso and Bottas, who had his problems. And then he almost was able to challenge Magnussen and Ricciardo at the end. So a very solid drive by Jenson Button. I do think he's overrated at points, but that was a very, very good drive from him, to be honest. But moving on to his teammate now, who kind of overshadowed Button in the end, despite Button's great drive, because Kevin Magnussen was the first rookie to get on the podium since Lewis Hamilton. Amazing drive by him, and he almost had Ricciardo at the end as well. His start was a bit scary when he almost binned it into the wall straight off the line, probably because of all the torque was for the cars, but it was still a very, very good drive, and he looked cool, calm and collected, much like the 2 in front of him. But it was great to see his father's reaction as well. Jan Magnussen, I think he was pretty emotional, so and it was pretty historical for Danish F1 drivers as well. I believe that was the first podium for a Danish F1 driver ever, so a historical day really in F1, entering a new era, and Magnussen kind of personifies that new era really. But an amazing drive by him, and he's definitely one for the future, and I still hold true to my prediction that he'll beat Button this season, and I think a lot more people will agree with me now. Moving on to 2nd, it's a controversial subject of Daniel Ricciardo, who had a very, very good weekend overall, but he may be slightly screwed over by his team. I'm just going to look on Twitter now, actually, whilst I'm uploading this, to see if there's been any more updates. So it looks like there's still pretty much Red Bull are arguing that Red Bull are trying to argue against it, saying that they actually put the right amount of fuel in the car, or there was some problems with the fuel, so they kind of had to do it. Not quite sure about that, to be honest, how they would be able to kind of counteract that they've put too much fuel in the car. I think that's a bit of a stupid mistake, really, and a mistake that the 4-time world champions really shouldn't be making at this level of the sport, really. They really shouldn't be making a mistake like that if they do end up getting disqualified, but that would be bitterly disappointing for Daniel Ricciardo if he does end up getting disqualified, because he's been solid all weekend. He was destroying everyone in qualifying. He was quickest in Q1 and Q2 at points, and he was obviously he almost had pole position yesterday, and he had a brilliant drive this morning as well. I mean, he was on the limit for the whole race, and he was controlling that car very well in a difficult situation especially when Magnussen was catching him and Button. So it was a great drive by him the whole weekend, but I'll be sad for him, and the smile maybe wiped off his face a bit if he is disqualified. But I really want to have it in. I can't even speak. I really want to see an interview with Christian Horner to see what the hell he's going to say about the car being overfueled, because that is a monumental mistake that you really can't make. Yeah, that would be very, very sad, but that'd also put Button on the podium, which would probably increase McLaren's Constructors' Championship lead, which also took me by surprise. McLaren definitely took me by surprise this weekend, and so did Red Bull, to be fair, and well, Ricciardo mainly, because just Ricciardo and Kevin Magnussen just completely took me by surprise this weekend. I don't think many people would have predicted the top three that we had today, but even back in winter testing, let alone flip in December or November when the last season finished. So very, very surprising day overall. But moving on to the winner by an almighty margin, Nico Rosberg pretty much dominated the race from start to finish after he got a brilliant start, lightning start off the line, dived in between all the cars and got it up to first straight away, and he never really looked back, to be honest. He just opened up the gap. It got brought back down by the safety car, but then he was just able to run away with it again. Didn't have the problems that Hamilton had, which was a good thing for Mercedes. So at least they got one car to the finish and obviously in first place. But he just controlled everything. He was very happy at the end of the race. I won my family betting and also got the Castrol F1 predictor thing right, so all smiles for me, really. Maybe not for Daniel Ricciardo, but Nico Rosberg, can't really dispute his win, to be honest. He just dominated the whole field, and that Mercedes looks like it could have a second on everyone at the moment, but I think everyone's waiting for that Hamilton-Nico Rosberg crash. Not crash, well, maybe we are waiting for a crash, but clash, I should say. And I just absolutely spat there when I said clash. But I'm even getting excited about the word clash between those two. But that may well happen at Malaysia, and we may see a repeat of Red Bull last season at Mercedes, or even a repeat of Mercedes with Rosberg having to stay behind. But if Rosberg is told to stay behind Hamilton at Malaysia, then I think he'd be pretty annoyed with that, especially after winning Australia. So there's a lot of catching up for Hamilton to do already, which is worrying for him. But Rosberg, if he can keep solid results, he'll definitely be the title favourite, especially if you can win another one of these flyaway races. But that is every single driver I've covered, so there's still a lot going on. Kobayashi pretty much has been cleared of any wrongdoing for that crash between Kobayashi and Massa, even though Massa wanted flipping Kobayashi to be banned, which was pretty harsh, I would say, although Massa probably wasn't too happy about that considering the pace of the Williams. But Ricciardo still ongoing. I'm pretty sure he's going to get disqualified though. To be honest, I can't see it going any other way, sadly, for him. So it'll be a pretty disappointing weekend for Red Bull if that does end up happening. But they've definitely shown they have the pace, and they're further up than a lot of people expected. But yeah, I guess we'll see about that, and I'll kind of put it in the comments what I think about it if he's disqualified or if he's not disqualified. But yeah, this has been a pretty nice video to put together. I got up so early this morning to watch it, and it was well worth waking up for, to be honest. I guess the race kind of got a bit dull towards the end, but there wasn't really many people running. Well, there wasn't really many people left in the race, so it's not too surprising that there wasn't an amazing amount of action. So thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye.